So my name is Megan. I'm going to be moderating today and doing some of the talking. And I am a graduate student at Central Washington University and the graduate student advisor for our club, which is Students with a Purpose.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jackson Sorensen. I am the president of Students with a Purpose. I'm starting my senior year at Central Washington University, and I am a public relations major.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dylan Gilbert. I am a senior at Central Washington University. My major is Information Technology Administrative Management, and I've served as secretary and senator for SWAP, and now I am vice president.
Hello, my name is Deanna Marshall, and I am one of the advisors for SWAP. I work for Central Washington University. I'm an advisor for the computer science, environmental studies, and physics departments.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm also an advisor for the club, have been since the origination, and I teach communication and public relations and nonprofit leadership.
And to get us started, I'm going to have Jackson lead us through some guidelines and ground rules for the session, and then we will jump into the Kahoot.
Thank you, Megan. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Jackson Sorensen. I am president of Students with a Purpose, and I thank you all for being here this afternoon. I wanted to address a few ground rules for today's discussion before we dive in. So first, let's wait to speak. Please wait to speak until the speaker or speakers have finished a point or thought. Let's listen actively and respect others when they are talking. Next, do not be afraid to respectfully challenge one another by asking questions, but let's please refrain from personal attacks. Lastly, let's participate to the fullest of our abilities. Community growth depends on the inclusion of every individual voice. While you do not need to vocally ask your question, you are more than welcome to write your question or questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to have it answered for you. Now, before we kick off this presentation, I'm going to pass it back over to Megan, who is going to take us through the group picture process.
So traditionally, we wanted to open the meeting as we would a Students with a Purpose meeting to kind of demonstrate what our space is like on Tuesday nights when we meet during the quarter. But since not everyone has the ability to turn their camera on, if you do, I would encourage you to do so right now, and we're going to take a group picture because this gives us a sense of community and togetherness, and it's just a nice thing to kind of enjoy in a moment of where we're all apart being together on screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to count to 3, then I'm going to scroll through and I'm going to take some screenshots. So on 3, give me your best face. So 1, 2, 3. I'm going to scroll one more. 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. It's just a fun thing we like to start the meeting with, and it gives us just a sense of community. So we're going to go ahead and get into some questions, and we want to get to know you guys before we get started. So first, we're asking, where are you from? Your state, city, area of the country you may be in. So through Kahoot, you can just type in your answer and submit it. And in a minute, you'll be able to see it all pop up on the screen and kind of see where people are joining us from today. Like we said, we're from Central Washington University. So Central Washington University is located in Washington State and in Ellensburg, Washington. So if you were to look at the state, stick your finger right in the middle, you could land right on Ellensburg and know where we are from today. The game pin is right down here in the corner. It is 3585707. It may not let you join while we've started, but if you would like, you can also participate through entering your answers in the chat as well. California. Perfect. it will let us. I'm not sure. Sorry. It didn't allow us to show the answers, and I don't know why. So next we're asking, what is your role? So when we're saying role, we're asking, are you faculty? Are you a student, undergraduate, graduate student? Do you have a different, are you staff at your institution? What kind of role do you play? Staff, faculty, chair. Very nice. Looks like we have a good variety of different roles, different levels. Just a couple more seconds. I'm seeing a couple locations come through too. Florida, Michigan, Minnesota, California. So one thing I love about these virtual settings is that we're able to join from anywhere and kind of get together in a space that we normally wouldn't. So it's fantastic. And our last question is going to be, what are you hoping to get from this session? So the next one, all you'll need to do is answer, when you looked at the session, when you read about it, what were you hoping to learn today, or learn about or take away? Their perspectives on your experience. Learn how to make students comfortable bringing their whole selves to our program. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing to want to do. How do you initiate and navigate those difficult conversations, and what resources you provide to help students? That is something we will definitely be talking about today. And it's nice because our team, we're made up of students, faculty, and staff, so you'll get a little bit of everyone's perspectives. It looks like we'll be able to see ideas for opening conversation with students, insight on what others are doing, connecting with students better. What is fantastic is I think that there's something in our presentation today and our discussion that will help everyone get what they're looking for. So first, we're gonna jump into telling you a little bit about Students with a Purpose, who we are, what we've done this year to create an inclusive and engaging space on campus. And so we'll have the first part of the presentation kind of be us talking about SWAP and what we've done so far this year. And then the last part of the session, we are going to be having a discussion through Kahoot and brainstorming ways that we can use these tools and resources in our own spaces. So first, who is SWAP? Like I said, SWAP stands for Students with a Purpose, and we are a student club at Central Washington University. We formed this group in the fall of 2019, and our mission is centered around engaging students and community members in nonprofit and social entrepreneurship-based work. Our greatest strength and what we contribute our success to is the fact that our team is interdisciplinary. We have students represented from each college on our campus, and then we have a variety of disciplines represented, such as business administration, liberal studies, supply chain management, public relations, ITAM, sociology, fashion, retail merchandising, communication, nonprofit management, almost you name a department on our campus and we have a student who's either in it or has interacted with it. And this is most useful when it comes to the strategic planning for SWAP because it ensures that a diverse set of perspectives and experiences are represented in the planning process. This year specifically, our group has continued to grow rapidly. We're only in the second year of our functioning, really. We originated in 2019, and our team made it a part of our goals to provide a space for students where they felt welcome, represented, and included in the conversation. We also wanted to provide a place on campus where students could come and hear different perspectives and engage in conversations about topics they're trying to learn more about. And we centered these conversations around topics pertaining to social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusivity, DEI, and civic engagement. And so we really wanted to provide a place where conversations could happen, and sometimes they may be difficult conversations, but where we could engage with each other, learn with each other, and grow with each other. Me and the rest of the group are going to be talking about some of the things that we did to expand the inclusion in SWAP this year. So our path to creating a more student-centered and an inclusive space at our campus. And we're going to start off with communication and then moving into group guidelines and ground rules. Then talking about how we wanted to amplify underrepresented voices and making sure that we weren't trying to be the expert in these conversations, but instead supplying the best person or people to talk about the topic. Then we are also going to be talking about incorporating virtual components to create a more inclusive space. Then we have Deanna and Jamie who are going to be talking about faculty and staff and student dynamic and how that dynamic can really impact how a group grows and how it functions. And then last, we're going to be talking about staying active and being inclusive and how you keep growing through the process. So I'm going to pass it to Dylan.
To start off, in order to create an inclusive and equitable space for students at SWAP, it was important that our leadership team be on the same page, and that started with streamlining our communication. Our student leadership team found in the beginning that we weren't moving forward towards our goals because we couldn't communicate with each other properly. To fix this issue, team members identified their different communication styles and determined how they could better talk and work with one another. We realized that previous issues with team members were the result of miscommunicating, and we were able to establish a healthier and more positive style of communicating with one another. This also helped open up a level of transparency between group members that previously did not exist. A lot of miscommunications came from leadership members making assumptions about others and choosing not to communicate or ask questions to confirm those assumptions. By identifying how our communication styles worked with one another, it led to less assumptions and more direct communication. Last, intentionality is important. One of the last things our group realized is that sometimes we communicate without considering the outcome or consequences of our communications. But the more intentional and aware we are of how we are saying things and how they impact others, the healthier our team communication became. When creating an inclusive space, it is so important to be intentional with your communication, and SWAP has made that a priority. Also, it is important to understand that while you may have good intentions in how you communicate, that does not ensure that it will be received well. But overall, it is up to you to hold yourself accountable in how you treat and talk to other people.
A ritual that we adopted this year is at the beginning of every meeting, the SWAP president addresses guidelines and ground rules for that specific meeting. When I stepped into the role of interim president spring quarter, I created my own script that was ever changing. As you can see from the picture, my script is constantly changing. Every week I edit my introduction to cater it more towards the type of discussion we will be having for that night. For example, this picture represents one of the first meetings that I had the opportunity to introduce. However, there have been nights where my script was more than one page, and that was due to the fact that I had to read bios and introduce our guest speakers. The actual ground rules have stayed consistent throughout the duration of my time as interim president. When we were creating the ground rules for the discussions, we wanted to inform people to not only be respectful of who is speaking, but to also encourage them to speak, whether that be through the chat or by using their own voice. What we commonly saw was that questions would be asked in the chat, and then the moderator would ask the questions to these guest speakers. Something that was important to us as a leadership team was incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion into both leadership development and club events. We want SWAP to be a place where everyone feels welcome and included. As you can see here, we've put on multiple workshops that promoted impactful conversations. A few topics we discussed were activism and how to be an activist in your local communities. We talked about sexual orientation, specifically coming out in the workplace and figuring out your workplace dynamic, and if that's somewhere you would feel safe coming out. We hosted a discussion on gender differences and motherhood, specifically in academia. We've talked about data privacy and ethics in regards to the web and internet. We've also talked about privilege, which has been a key conversation about a lot of topics we've discussed this year. We talked about understanding our own privilege and power and how to utilize that in a beneficial way. We also talked a lot about voting and had a lot of content surrounding that due to the election that was happening at that time. These images here demonstrate just some of the topics and conversations that we have had the opportunity to focus on this year. While our end goal was to have at least 50% of our meetings consist of DEI topics, currently 68% of our meetings met that criteria.
And before we just move into virtual tools, I do want to note too that all of these topics that SWAP was discussing were student requested. So we started off the year with our How to Become an Activist in Your Local Community, because that was something that was happening very actively in Ellensburg. Ellensburg is a small town, and throughout the summer we had a group of protesters that was at the corner by our courthouse every single day protesting for, it was almost a full 365 days they did. And a lot of students were interested, how do you get involved? How do you engage as an activist in a smaller community and within your institution? And so we created a panel and brought it forward. And then from there on, after each meeting, we would send out a survey and ask what students wanted to hear more about, what conversations did they want to have. And that's how we came up with the rest of these topics to discuss. So it's really important to keep your student stakeholders within the space engaged and giving you feedback on the direction they want to see the group go. So I'll let Dylan continue.
Thank you, Megan. And to confirm, you guys can see and hear me, right? I'm joining from my phone, so I'm just making sure. For SWAP, we recognized during our first year that integrating virtual meeting components into our events and meetings was essential to being available to all students. We thankfully had help with this through the perspective of an online student who sat on our founding leadership team. She has been a student of our advisor, Jamie, and had expressed a desire to be more involved on campus, but there were not a lot of opportunities to do so while being an online student. She said she felt really disconnected from campus and her college experience because of it, and asked Jamie if she knew of any opportunities available to online students, and Jamie brought her to SWAP. While the pandemic pushed us into expanding our virtual capabilities as a team, it was something that was already a priority to us. A virtual meeting space allows all students to engage in the opportunities that SWAP offers, instead of only making it available to students who are on our campus. For institutions, where you have center campuses and a large population of fully online students, this type of virtual incorporation is important to being truly inclusive. In order to keep progressing in regards to this goal, this next year we will be offering hybrid style meetings where online students can engage with meetings and events while they're being held in person. We also plan to offer outreach events that are solely held online and virtually. And then last, we are going to be switching to the Google Meet platform due to the fact that their captioning software is much more inclusive than Zoom. Google Meet allows you to capture captions in real time, which is helpful for non-native English speakers or individuals with hearing disabilities that may be attending our meeting. While Google Meet only offers this in one language, English, it is still a step ahead of Zoom and can help us increase the accessibility and inclusiveness of our meetings.
So to further understand the dynamic between the leadership team and the advisors, it's really important to understand how SWAP originated. The idea for SWAP came from a group of students in one of my classes. They identified that there was a need for a place on campus for students who wanted to continue making a difference in the world while completing their academic journey, and one that where they can engage in conversations that challenge students to think differently or expand their worldview. They sought me out as an advisor because they knew that I would be supportive and helpful in leading them to starting a space like the one they were referring to. And it was in my classes and the projects that this idea originally had stemmed. I'd like to add that this idea stemmed after their spring project, and they literally showed up in my office and said, "We need to talk." Then over the summer, this is a year before the pandemic, they wanted to meet on Zoom so that they could build their bylaws and really develop what that club would look like to them. So they gave a lot of free time in the summer to make this happen. And then that winter, over break, they wanted to continue to do those type of Zoom meetings so they could further develop their leadership skills, all pushed by them, and it was amazing. Well, in the beginning, my leadership with the students was much more active and hands-on because they were just learning. As the group continued to grow and evolve, so did the students. It's been amazing to watch. I've watched over the last 2 years as the student leaders have grown from sitting back and watching the work be done to becoming fully engaged and now leading the work. Jackson, as president, he was in my First Amendment class, and you could tell he just had so much to share with the world. And so I invited him to a meeting. He's like, I'll come, extra credit. Now, not only did he then run for secretary, but he became vice president. Our president this last year had an emergency, and Jackson stepped into that role, and it was completely fluid. The thing is, when you provide students an environment of respect and trust, they will start to grow within it. The thing that derails students that I have worked with personally is the fear that if they are wrong, that they will fail. But if you help them understand that being wrong isn't always a bad thing, and instead is how we learn and grow and how we flourish. That's one of the things I really stress with my research students, is that sometimes not getting the answer that you think that you're going to get can be a glorious discovery. Also, micromanaging student-centered spaces leaves students feeling stifled and incapable of doing the work themselves, and really unprepared to go on into the professional world. Students are looking for mentorship and support, not for someone to do the work for them. In order to provide an inclusive space where they can lead, you can listen to them and validate their experience and frustrations, but let them work on the problem solving together. Provide constructive feedback alongside the praise. They're going to be the first ones to tell you what they did wrong. So when they're doing that, then encourage them on how to do things in another way, but not necessarily that their way was wrong. They just didn't have the tools before to do it in this other manner. Give them tools, resources, and pathways towards growth. Then acknowledge and recognize their growth. I know that a couple of the students said, wow, that was great, or even seeing something going on in their other part of their life, and that they know that you're engaged in their whole professional growth, and just receiving those messages has meant the world to them when sometimes, especially during the pandemic, they felt isolated. Incorporate their feedback into your own leadership. One of the things we've learned with our club is that it's a two-way communication. And I know that Megan is going to send you out the measure that we use, but at the end of the day, you are part of the team, and the relationship is reciprocal instead of being one-sided. You learn a lot from your students. As much as you're helping guide them, you're gaining so much more in the long run.
Hi, I'm going to talk a little bit about my dynamic as another one of the advisors for SWAP. I met Jamie, I think about 2.5 years ago now. I did a presentation in one of her First Amendment classes, and through time, I learned about SWAP from her. And the more that I actually learned about SWAP, the more resolved I became to be I wanted to be involved with it. Someone's asking what my staff involvement is. I am the academic advisor for 3 departments here at Central Washington University: computer science, environmental studies, and physics. SWAP and I share a common interest in the overall theme of what SWAP is. The contents and the topics are very timely. We see these issues in general in the news and on social media. They're reflective of our society and our culture, and they manifest on campus on a daily basis. And as Megan talked, there was a group that was protesting in our downtown area. And Ellensburg is a very small town. Downtown is 2 blocks away from campus. So it is something that we were seeing very regularly. SWAP satisfies the need to push for change for the betterment and the inclusion of all, and that is very near and dear to me. The topics are meaningful to me personally and professionally, so I see the benefits to students, to the departments, and to the campus as a whole. College clubs and organizations in general provide an outlet for students to meet like-minded individuals and share experiences. Clubs and organizations are often seen as niche because of this. And my experience with SWAP is that it's actually the very opposite of niche. Their topics address uncomfortable topics with a nuanced sensitivity, having the ground rules right up at the beginning of the meetings, create an opportunity to exchange unpopular ideas or things that possibly are not considered acceptable in the real world or outside of a particular culture or a particular mindset. And those ground rules really allow for the opportunity for a variety of voices to be heard and expressed. Another way that SWAP is not niched is that their topics are so varied. They're not specialized or localized into only one area. In addition, SWAP as a whole represents all 4 colleges at CWU. So SWAP membership models the behavior that they're looking to address. They want an inclusive world. They created an inclusive space. Our members are the nerds, the scientists, the artisans, the future business leaders, our future educators, and our professional students and our professional athletes. Everyone is represented either as a member or within leadership or comes to the meetings. I cannot stress how important it is that the organization be student driven. I am not a micromanager. I really would prefer not to even be known because it's the students that need to be at the forefront. It's vital that there's an environment that exists where students are safe to feel, to take risk, to problem solve amongst themselves, and empowered to make decisions. My role is to be a resource to help SWAP leadership and members move forward and remove obstacles if they run into problems. As the advisor, the word is advisor, advice, advise, do not necessarily do for them. I have to avoid micromanaging at all costs. I need to be the calm voice that helps them know it's okay for them to not know the answer to every question or issue that may arise. My role is to wait to step in and actually wait until I'm asked, even if I think there's a better way to do it. They need to learn what's going to work for them. When necessary, help shrink the university and make it personal and relatable. I want to encourage the environment that helps SWAP members feel connected to the university as a whole. Their empowerment comes from seeing their efforts are fruitful and are making a difference. SWAP events and topics quite often mirrored the DEI and anti-racism efforts that were being addressed at CW this year. And CW recognized these efforts of the club and named SWAP as Club of the Year. Lastly, The skills that SWAP leadership and members gained as part of the involvement in SWAP will continue to be meaningful to the outside world once they leave academia, and it will be useful long-term. I push students as much as possible to be their own person, not who they think that I want them to be, or even necessarily who society thinks they should be. It has to be individual. This opportunity for growth was built into every facet of SWAP. Everything from the students learning time management, organizational skills, communication, leadership, personal identity, finance, fundraising, networking, all of the different tools that the person's going to need to be successful long-term. I'm going to echo some of the things that you heard already from Megan and from Jamie and from Jackson and Dylan. SWAP creates an environment where students can be creative, resilient, and focused on doing things that are going to make a difference during a time of great uncertainty. They accomplish their goals and address them and bring to the forefront their DEI issues. And I think that they've done a wonderful job this year.
I want to say thank you to both Deanna and Jamie for sharing, because I can say as students who've worked with them both, especially in the SWAP environment, they provide such a space for us to grow and learn and just challenge ourselves. And I don't know if SWAP would be progressing the way it is without them, and just their ability to teach us, learn with us, and help us grow. So the last thing I do want to talk about before we kind of jump into a group discussion is this idea that inclusivity doesn't just happen. It comes from continued and determined action. And so you have to stay active, you have to stay learning, and you have to stay growing. And it has to be intentional. You have to make the time for it and the space for it. For us, it's important that our leadership team models the behaviors and environment we seek to provide for other students. And this is in any space that you have, whether it be an undergraduate research program, a student club, in a classroom. If you model certain behaviors that you want to see reflected, it helps through the process. And with our commitment to stay active, we know that each of us carry implicit biases, and that we're doing our best to educate ourselves and challenge those biases every day. We also understand that these biases we hold will never be completely eliminated, and it's our responsibility to consistently challenge and correct ourselves. Our leadership team has come to a point where we know that we're not an expert on DEI, we're not an expert on inclusivity, but we know what we want to see, and we know that we're willing to put in the work together. And so that is what we continue to do. And I'm just going to answer the question in the chat really quick. Is the SWAP leadership incentivized or compensated in some way? No. This is a student club, so the students have to come together to form their leadership team, and run the club, but they are not compensated other than they have this leadership experience to place, I guess, on their resume or their CVs. But this is time that they take out of their week each week to plan and grow the organization and provide a space for students, because it was a space that they saw that they wanted and they didn't see it present on campus. And so they knew that they had to find a way to create it. So that is something unique about SWAP. In addition to like staying active in regards to inclusivity, it's important to recognize, especially in academia, that traditionally student spaces have been centered or built around white norms and representation. For many students of color, unless they go to an HBCU or a minority serving institution, they'll not see themselves represented completely in the faculty, staff, or administration of an institution. They won't see themselves represented in the content or the spaces that are available for them on campus. And so it's important to, one, recognize this, and then continuously evaluate our spaces and determine how we can be better to serve all students, not just one type of student. Last, it's you have to incorporate it into your strategic planning. So diversity, equity, and inclusivity shouldn't just be one initiative or a single item on your plan for the year or the plan for the space. It should form the foundation of your planning, and every single initiative and every single item on that plan should be looked at through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusivity, because it creates then a foundation for your group and a tone for your space. And the more you incorporate it into everything, the more likely it will stand true and be reflected. So that is SWAP and what we have worked on this year. Now we're going to actually move into a little bit of discussion, and we're going to do it through Kahoot. So we are going to be talking about experiences where you may have felt excluded in the process and ways that we can improve those experiences. I understand that content like that or sharing in that way can be triggering for some or difficult. So if you would rather not share and just listen, that is completely okay. But I'm going to move into this next question. And what I want you to think about is, even if you're faculty, administration, you're a current student, at some time you have engaged in a research environment, maybe a UR environment specifically, I want you to reflect on that experience and think if there was ever a time where you felt excluded during the process, and what led to you feeling that way. So I'm going to open that question up, allow some time for everyone to respond, and then we will take some time to discuss. Thank you for those of you that shared or submitted and answered. I'm going to show the answers really quick. In undergrad, I was told I couldn't learn research because women are bad at math. Male colleagues structuring and leading conversations on department business, especially when I was junior faculty, felt steamrolled. Because I am only staff, that is something I have heard quite a bit. I'm often the only person of color in my classes, and I'm constantly assumed to have less knowledge than them. I assume my math background was weak in physical chemistry program. I'm a female Asian. So thank you so much for everyone that is shared, and I encourage you to read and look through these. I know everyone has different experiences, and exclusion can happen on so many different levels. I see things like imposter syndrome in here. I do know also, as a first generation student, I felt like the path to research was hidden from me. Like it was something I had to find or dig out on my campus. So once I got in, I felt included, but to get there felt like a process. So before we kind of move into talking about ways that we can reduce or exclusion or increase inclusivity in these spaces, I want to ask another question, and that is, if you read that previous question and you could not remember a time where you felt excluded, why do you think that may be? And just take a minute and sit with it, and then feel free to answer. Thank you again for everyone that is choosing to share. We really appreciate it, and I'm about to show these answers. Privilege, socioeconomic privilege. This gives me opportunities to participate in volunteer initiatives on campus, conferences, unpaid research, and other opportunities I would have not had otherwise. Exposure. We are used to being excluded, therefore we are no longer aware that it is happening. I can physically identify with people in my classes. There's some really great information in here, and especially when it comes to a certain privilege or a certain thing that we may have in these spaces that we don't realize that we have. And so specifically in regards to socioeconomic privilege or white privilege, when it comes to these spaces, I'm so used to having it designed around the norms that I've grown up in or have been socialized in, that I don't see it as being exclusive, because it's fully inclusive to me. So sometimes this question, when trying to think about how to create a more inclusive space, can be just as important as the exclusion question, because you start by evaluating your own experiences and then evaluating and listening to others' experiences and incorporating all of those into kind of one thing to evaluate and then develop your own space that can be inclusive. So I really appreciate everyone sharing. And I want you to think, if you saw one up on the screen or you shared an experience yourself, this next question is, what are ways that you could have seen in your own experience or in the experience of others that a space could have been more inclusive? What could have someone done to make your experience more inclusive? And so I'll give you some time right before we finish this up to answer that. And then what we'll do, this is a brainstorm question. So you have the chance to share like 3 things that could create a more inclusive space in your experience. And then we'll be able to put them on the screen. And if you like a certain method or a certain tool, you can vote on it, and then it will share them all on the screen at the end so you can see them. But it provides us a way to kind of share tools and resources or ideas with each other, and then for you to evaluate and see if that's something that would be helpful in a space that you're creating or currently running or leading, or just something that you can keep in mind as you go into spaces and advocate for more inclusivity. I would encourage anyone who is finished answering to check out what Herbert put in the chat. And I'm going to read it really quick, but it says, when I was an undergrad many years ago, I don't recall UR being something in which we poli-sci majors engaged. In fact, I only took a poli-sci stats class, no research methodology classes, but my undergrad institution was very diverse, including the students in the poli-sci department. So if there was a faculty-led effort to engage us in UR, I think there would have been well represented by a good deal of human diversity. And I think that's such a great point is when you have an institution that is diverse, you have the opportunity to create really great diverse spaces. But it's also about intentionally recruiting and seeking out students, maybe if you don't have that sample population to pull from, or you don't have an institution that is that widely diverse. You have to be more active in your recruiting and representing and exposing that place to other students. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I think there's been some really great tools that have been shared here. So acknowledging the impact of implicit and structural bias, recognized bias. I'm going to group some of these together before we finish up, if it'll let me. But model inclusivity. So yes, in that leadership, provide the tools you want your students to learn by modeling it yourself. Transparent, applied, and specific inclusion language. Inclusivity and intention of inclusivity is so important, and continued action, continuing to model it. Creating spaces and activities. So there's some great tools here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the voting process. What that will allow, it's called voting. But what you can do is it'll show you each of those tools. If it's something that you think could work in your space, or something that you think would be a great thing to include in your spaces, please give it kind of an uptick vote. And then we will show it. And then we are going to close our session for today. As you guys vote, I just want to say thank you again for everyone attending, for being willing to participate in our Kahoot and our interactive session. This is our first time putting on a session like this for a group of this size. So we just really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen, to engage with us. And if you have any further questions, I'm going to show just I'll put in the chat actually to everyone our Gmail. So if you're interested in any kind of the materials or tools we went over in the session, some of you sent me emails privately to send the communication measure out to, but you can send them to this Gmail and contact us. Also, if you're interested in doing something like SWAP at your institution, or you know students who may be interested, please direct them our way, because we would love to see this space grow beyond our own campus. And thank you so much for sharing, Gretchen. Interrogating the cultural norms and privilege that structure research practice in your discipline is essential. It's just really like being aware of everything that goes into the creation of the space in the first place. If you want to transform it, you first have to know what went into building it. And if there's things you have to break down, that's where you're going to find them. And I completely agree. The norms and the structure that it was first built is essential to know. So we have about 20 seconds left. Fantastic. It should show up. Okay. Awesome. So this was our top kind of voted ones. Have multiple mediums for people to contribute thoughts and feedback. Absolutely. Model inclusivity. And then also in group conversations, pay attention to who is speaking and who is not. Speaking is important, and silence and observing silence is also very important. And just before we close, I think we have like 1 or 2 minutes. When it comes to having multiple mediums for people to contribute thoughts and feedback, this is also essential in setting the ground rules or the guidelines for your space. So what we do at SWAP is we do it through a parking lot, but we do a parking lot session where we brainstorm what expectations, what we want our, how we want our group to function and how we want to show respect to each other. But sometimes that can be difficult, especially if you're a single voice in a room that's voicing something else. So we have students submit it through like a Google form, their request, and then as a leaders, we kind of dissect that, put it all together, and then bring it back for discussion. And that just allows us to have every voice represented, rather than maybe asking them to speak up when they're on their own, or maybe feel overwhelmed, or may feel new in the space. So I would highly recommend that. So I'm just going to put on the screen, because we are closing now, our contact information. If you have any further questions, please let us know. And I just want to say thank you again for joining us today. We hope you got something and took some tools away from this session. Thank you, everyone.